Okay, so we will talk today about the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It is one of the all-time classics, in my opinion, not just my opinion. It has sold over 30 million copies. So, and that was at 2011, according to the stat that I found on the internet. So it's probably sold a lot more since then. It continues to sell year after year. So the interesting
year it was written?
It was written in 1936.
Right.
My dad had it, and he used to, he was just over the moon with it. He rammed it down everyone's throats every 5 minutes, but it was really good. You know, I enjoyed it. I was about 9 or 10 or something, you know, when he discovered this book. And, you know, he was always a mover and a shifter. He loved anything new that was around. And he was a thinker as well. He was a highly intelligent man, very dominated by my mother, you know. I wasn't allowed any freedom. So he was like a child and got quite sneaky. But my mum was a very negative person. So, of course, Dad, you know, this was a wonderful book. He just went over, and I'd hear him laughing. You know, he would laugh when he read it, you know, because, yeah, because it was so obvious. You know, some of the things were so obvious, he'd roar with laughter. So,
yeah, it's I found it. I was introduced to it when I was involved with a multi-level marketing business, actually, back in my early years in Australia, probably around about when did I move over here? December 85. So it's probably around about 1987 I got this book, and this one I had was fully revised for the 80s. So yeah, so when you think about that, it's a bit like when we've studied Think and Grow Rich. It's written in the same era, 1936. Yeah. I think it was his daughter, or maybe it's even his granddaughter, I'm not sure, I have to work that one out, but has done a revision of it and changed a few things. Now I don't know, I don't have the original copy, so I don't know what they've changed, but it says in the preface here that, and this was by Dorothy Carnegie, that they've changed some of the examples that we used in there to bring it more up to date, because people would not have heard of the people that he's referencing. And I've already experienced that with a couple of the people that he's quoted. I'm thinking, I don't know who that is, you know. Obviously there's some.
Tony, did you read the woman's version of Think and Grow Rich?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you really should. I think you really enjoy it.
Yeah, I will. I'll put it on the list. I just haven't had time to get around to it. So,
no, and you know, it gets to the stage a wee bit. You know, I'm a bit sick of looking at it. You know, all the principles, because I mean, it's wonderful. You can discuss it forever.
Yes, you can. It's a book you can revisit, but you do need to move on and look at other things.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I
spent this morning trying to get into Zen. What are they in?
Zen Vestas. Yeah.
And he had a thing on the Zoom this morning at 6 o'clock, but I couldn't get in. Nobody was letting me in. So, okay. Have you done any of those, Tony? I know. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, I haven't. Let's go on to let's do the Noble Goldman principles just to set the framework for the meeting. So I'll just share screen and bring that up. So this is going to be short and sweet today because there's only 3 of us. So Coralie, I think you just pipped Julie getting on the call first. So you can be number 1, Julie number 2, and I'll go number 3.
Okay.
Okay, mastermind principles. The purpose of the mastermind is to learn leadership, build teams, and create multiple sources of income together.
We are here to inspire and challenge each other to reach and exceed goals.
Each member is committed to their own success as well as the success of every member of the group.
We are committed to meeting in person or virtually for 1 hour every week.
We are present. There is no multitasking or distractions during the meetings.
We are collaborative. We listen without interrupting, lecturing, or judging.
We celebrate each other's successes without jealousy.
We are honest and participate by giving thoughtful feedback.
We are open and listen to different perspectives without being defensive or offering excuses.
We trust fellow members enough to share fully.
We are focused, but we also think it's important to have fun during meetings.
We are real and authentic. This is a no BS zone.
We allow ourselves to become completely aligned with each other and the high forces, one mind, one soul, one love.
Noble Goldman International is a conscious, aware and engaged global community of abundance and freedom creators.
Our mission is to create 1 million millionaires who are free from the time for money paradigm. We focus on creating multiple streams of income through masterminding, team building, and the effective utilization of the internet-based platforms.
The mastermind becomes an opportunity for self-mastery, where the self-transcendent shift from the me to the we to the us occurs. As congruence and engagement increases, the world's consciousness is then raised one meaningful and inspired relationship at a time.
I love that. That last paragraph is so powerful, isn't it?
I love it.
Yeah.
I was hoping I'd get it today. But I'm very happy for you to have it.
My gift to you.
Okay. So that is done. So just to go back to what I was saying, this you haven't read it yet, have you, Julia? Didn't have a copy of it, is that right?
No, I've ordered one.
Okay.
Gee, but I have a real problem reading actually at the moment. Unless I can read it aloud, I lose concentration.
Plus you're on masterminds all day, so it's hard to fit in.
Yes.
What about you, Carly? Have you had a chance to read any of it?
I've got it, and I'm up to page 22,
Okay.
which is only in chapter 1.
All right, that's fine. Well, like I said, I'm going to give a summary. I thought this, I know sort of perhaps didn't give people long enough. I don't know, everyone reads at different speeds, but it seemed to make sense to me to cover the first 3 chapters today, which is part 1 of the book, because they are all related to the same topic, which is fundamental techniques in handling people. So I'll give you an overview of it all, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I'll firstly just cover the fact that it was written, as I said, in 1936. So a lot of the language is slightly older and a bit old-fashioned in some respects, but it's been revised in 1981 by Dorothy Carnegie. It originally was written as a textbook for courses in effective speaking and human relations. And he wrote it because he couldn't find any books on the topic, believe it or not, back then. So I thought, well, I'll write one then. And it was just intended to be a supporting textbook for his courses, but it just captured people's imagination and nailed so many key points in human relations that it's become a go-to book for the self-development genre, although he wouldn't probably have called it self-development himself. Now, I've actually just downloaded the audio book of How to Win Friends and Influence People in the Digital Age. So it's more a modernizing thing for the age that we're in, of being aware of the impact of social media on all of this. Because bear in mind, at the time that he wrote this, there was really there was no internet. And so winning friends and influencing people was literally about meeting people and handshakes and eye contact and body language and putting the effort into building personal friendships and contacts.
Social events.
Exactly. So it was written, like nowadays we just, you have these so-called influencers who are the people that write things on, well, they have a YouTube channel or they have a Facebook page, and so in some cases can be followed by millions of people. But do they actually know their followers? In most cases, probably not. What he's talking about here is building the real McCoy, building actual real legitimate friendships or
relationships.
Yeah. So there is a difference there. So I'll be interested to see how that
well, the papers, of course, back then, of course, there would have been the newspapers that were a huge thing.
Yeah, communication was a completely different kettle of fish altogether. And so we have to put that in context when we take on reading this book, because it was written in a different era with a whole different set of social paradigms, and yet it has still stood the test of time and is still selling multiple copies every year. And like I said, it's sold now over 30 million copies. So it still is relevant in terms of how we impact on our human relations with each other and building those relationships. So a little bit more about the how-to, which was covered in the preface, the how and why it was written, and then he did 9 how to use this book tips. So what he mentioned in that was that dealing with people is probably the biggest problem you face, especially if you're in business. So
I think
yeah,
in anything.
in anything, but yes, that's true. He also mentioned that even if you were studying, and he did a lot of research into the colleges, but if you were studying, say, for instance, engineering, he still found that 15% of your success in engineering was technical, but 85% was down to your personality and your ability to lead people. So it didn't matter what technical subject you were studying, it still came back to, you can be the best technical person at any of the technical fields, but if you can't relate to people, you're not going to be as successful. So,
you know, this is all just, you know, this is exactly what happened to my dad. And I think that's why he had such a fascination for communication and learning more about communication, because he was an engineer. And, well, he was actually, my mother called him an engineer, and he was, but he was actually a sheet metal worker that was, you know, an advanced apprentice, which, you know, these days would be considered like an engineer, I guess, or a degree. But he had the most god-awful experiences with people coming from education, or, you know, with degrees and God knows what else, you know, in his workplace, and they were just useless. They couldn't do the job. They couldn't even function properly because they couldn't communicate it clearly, and they didn't follow, you know, their planning and everything else was even how they attacked a job. Yeah,
I think that's true of any field of work, really. You know, the people that are the most successful are the ones who are able to communicate their ideas. This is what he puts in here, is they're able to express their ideas, to assume leadership, and to arouse enthusiasm, as you were talking about before. That's a great gift.
That's the influencing people, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the influencing part of it. So my father was an engineer as well, interesting, an aircraft engineer. Well, started off fixing Spitfires in the war, but ended up working for British Airways for 27 years. And used to
my dad was in the Air Force as well, but he was only a pilot officer or something, a pilot officer.
Yeah.
But yeah, he didn't go to war.
No, Dad was on Malta when the Germans were bombing it relentlessly.
Oh yeah.
But
he
yeah,
had the fortunate talent of being able to play the piano, and he used to play the piano for the mess, and so they kept him back. We heard this later, just a few years ago, that they didn't want him going to war because he was too good of a pianist in the officers' mess.
My father played the accordion.
There you go. See.
So yeah, but yeah, he used to say the same thing at British Airways. You know, there was people who would get the promotion, and yet they couldn't manage people, and they might have.
Yeah, terrible.
Well, I think there was a lot of jobs for the boys type things as well. But he progressed. He ended up being an engineering supervisor and had to sign out the aircraft as being safe to fly on. So it was quite a responsible job.
Big job. My dad ended up a teacher at secondary school and continued to get bullied in many ways, you know. So it was a bit of a shame. He should have stayed in the industry. I think it was my mother with her inflated, upwardly mobile sort of idea that teachers are better than engineers, you know. So. Or tradesmen, you know, so well, it put him under a lot of pressure because it was post-war. Yeah.
One thing my dad had drummed into me is the importance of reading, because he was always reading as well. And
in the toilet, did you have reading books in your toilet?
Yeah, I've never really got into that one. I found that a bit odd. But...
No, but my dad did. It's probably the only place he could get peace from.
Quiet. Yeah, that's right. So according to, and I don't know, does anyone know who Herbert Spencer is? Have you ever heard that name? But apparently he's quoted, Herbert Spencer said, the great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. So the point about this book that Dale Carnegie wrote it for was that it is a book for action. It is a book to use as a tool to refer back to reread frequently. He even recommends having a copy of it on your desk and highlighting it and going back through. So it's something that, because the topic is something that we
They have highlighters then.
Yeah, maybe not. Underlined perhaps in pencil. But whatever way you choose to, I use highlighter pens myself these days. But whatever way you choose to look at it, it's a reference book. So it is designed to be used to help you to keep on working on your self-mastery. We are all a work in progress. And so good work, well done. You get a tick or a gold star. So he goes on to give 9 suggestions, and I'll just refer back to those. How to get the most out of this book. So develop a deep driving desire to master the principles of human relations. Read each chapter twice before going on to the next one. As you read, stop frequently to ask yourself how you can apply each suggestion. Underscore each important idea. Review this book each month. Apply these principles at every opportunity. Use this volume as a working handbook to help you solve your daily problems. Make a lively game out of your learning by offering some friend a dime or a dollar every time he or she catches you violating one of these principles. Check up each week on the progress you are making. Ask yourself what mistakes you've made, what improvement, what lessons you have learned for the future. And finally, keep notes in the back of this book showing how and when you have applied these principles. Now, I'd say most of the people who read this probably wouldn't follow all of those things. But
no, I mean, while you're reading all these instructions, I'm just going, oh God, not again. You know,
another one.
Sorry, I'm going, oh shit, I've been doing that with Think and Grow Rich, but trying to do it for ages, and then oh no, not some more to do.
But the funny thing is, so it's been some years since I read it last. And what I found was, because I did read it a lot when I first read this book back, because I was a young bloke back in, just emigrated to Australia and young family. And I was so impacted by this book that I did go back through and I did highlight things. And what I realized in rereading it now, all these years later, is that I absorbed a lot of those principles.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And that I share the same philosophies as him, because I took them on board. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm still a work in progress even now at 60, but a perfect work in progress. That's right. But I think it's important to remind yourself of these things. So there's three chapters we're covering here, and there's 3 key principles. So I'll jump straight to the chase, so to speak, and tell you what the 3 principles are. And then we'll go back and review each one on each chapter. So the first principle is don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
It's very much like the
4 agreements.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Isn't it? Yes. Number 2, give honest and sincere appreciation.
Yeah.
Number 3, arouse in the other person an eager want. And what did Napoleon Hill call it? A burning desire.
Oh, yes. And we were discussing that last night about the burning desire and how it's a generation, well, a little bit older than us.
Yep.
And not you, Coralie.
Well,
you're younger than me. But how the burning desire was seen as kind of like a sexual passion, you know, that it had a bit of a connotation of fanaticism, you know, to it. A burning desire was something that wasn't healthy, you know, and so we were discussing that last night, and it was more, yeah. And then what was that? What do they call it? The sex transmutation. It became quite an issue about
it
the
would
burning
have, because
desire.
it's 1936, and Think and Grow Rich was written in 1938. So we're
Yeah.
talking the same era, an era where there was still slavery in America.
Yeah.
Women didn't have the vote. There was,
Yeah.
women didn't really have
I know.
rights. They were sort of more an adornment, and that they ran the household.
Or they had rights during the war and then lost them when they came back.
That's true though, because in the war everyone's effort was required, and then they took a step back, and then it took another few years for
No, they were chucked out.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they took a step back. They were thought, right, that's it for you.
Yes, well, I suppose because the men were not here, they were away at war, so the women had to. My mother worked in a munitions factory, so they all had to play their part, in keeping the war effort going.
And then, of course, when the men came back, they had to have jobs again. So
that's right, they needed the work. So
and society wasn't up to having both employed, so it was a whole shift.
No, it's very much still the case. The woman was supposed to stay home and run the household and look after the children, and have the food ready on the table when the man got home.
In my job at in Amsterdam, I had all the the seniors that were doing their kind of projects. They were called special projects, and they'd have to pick a subject, and one of the girls picked the role of woman and the effect of the war on the role of woman in America, and she used her own grandmother, and it was fascinating. It was really, really interesting, because they were, it was tough, but it was the beginning of feminism, of course.
Yeah. So again, this is a book that could probably be updated. Well, it's been revised by Dorothy Carnegie, so obviously she sounds like a woman to me, the name Dorothy. And you'd have to think that there could be a female version written of this book today that would perhaps focus on some different aspects. But certainly a lot of the language could be updated, and a lot of the case studies could be updated. But still,
the principles remain the same, don't they?
They're timeless. They are timeless. So the first chapter, so we'll review each chapter in turn. So the first chapter is, if you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. I suppose that would come down to misbehaving. Oh dear. I get a dad joke in. So he starts off with a story that I hadn't heard of till I read this book. Ever heard of Two Gun Crowley? Crowley?
No, no, just was,
So 1931, there'd been a sensational manhunt to catch this guy in New York City who was well, he'd be a domestic terrorist today, but he was a gangster, and he robbed banks and that sort of stuff, as far as I understand. So there was a manhunt to try and track him down, and he was captured. But what had happened in this story was that he had been with his girlfriend out on a country road, and a policeman had walked up and said, "Let me see your license." So Two Gun Crowley shot him and killed him.
As you do.
And he was sentenced to the electric chair. But when he arrived at the death house at the prison, this is what I'm quoting from the book now, did he say, "This is what I get for killing people"? No, he said, "This is what I get for defending myself." The point of the story is that Two Gun Crowley didn't blame himself for anything. And he goes on to talk about Al Capone. Al Capone, "I have spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse, the existence of a hunted man." So the point was that gangsters and criminals justify their actions, but not just those guys. All of us, we all justify our actions. So
it's a very good one. It's actually quite appropriate for me at the moment. I'm looking into some things.
So if everyone justifies their actions, all right, there's a conflicting thing here. We can be our own worst inner critics, but at the same time, we do tend to rationalize. And they say rationalize is when you tell yourself rational lies, is that you come up with a reason why you did what you did. You have to justify your actions, or even your thoughts, or your standpoint on a certain topic.
Yes. Otherwise you wouldn't carry on doing it, would you?
No, we all have to make a decision to do
They obviously
something.
lost their conscience somewhere along there.
That's right. So that's an extreme example, a magnification of everyday life. When someone is at this point where they're killing someone and justifying it, well, I had to defend myself, even though all the policeman did in that case was to say, can I see your license? That wasn't a threat, but he regarded it as a threat, and he was being hunted. So in his mind, he was perfectly justified in killing the cop.
Bonnie and Clyde, same thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And that's been a sort of fundamental principle of, and I suppose Hollywood paints it a certain way as well, but in any of the characters throughout history, they all justify their actions.
Godfather.
They believe they're doing the right thing. Yeah, The Godfather, great collection of movies. And
Ned Kelly in Australia.
So the point that came from that was that if other people are going to have justified or rationalized what they do and why they do it, or why they think what they think, it means that criticism of people is futile, because it puts them on the defensive. It makes them feel like they have to justify their actions even more. So when you have a go at someone, you're attacking their pride, you're attacking their sense of importance, and therefore it arouses resentment, or can do. So if a person is not open to the constructive criticism, shall we call it, but they see it as an attack on them, and they have to defend why they did what they did, or why they thought what they thought. So you're not going to win in that case, are you? No. Unless you can get them to see that they didn't have the right information, or they were misplaced in their decision making in some way. They're not going to see it. They're going to want to defend their position.
I think that's it. Do you know, I thought I was not even wanting to listen, but you know, I couldn't have heard anything more appropriate than that today.
Well, he goes on to quote, as I say, a few people that you probably won't have heard of. He says, B.F. Skinner, the world famous psychologist, who I confess I've never heard of, but he proved through his experiments that an animal rewarded for good behavior will learn much more rapidly and retain what it learns far more effectively than an animal punished for bad behavior. And studies have shown that the same applies to humans.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and another great psychologist, Hans Selye, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, as much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation. So he gave quite a few examples. One was where an engineer, a safety coordinator for an engineering company, one of his responsibilities was to check that employees were wearing their hard hats. Now, doesn't that have a familiar tone today about wearing masks we were just talking about before? If someone comes up and tells you you have to wear a mask, what's your reaction is to stuff you, buddy, and as soon as they walk off and they're not looking, their mask comes off again, doesn't it? Well, this is what he was saying in this story, is the hard hat comes off because they didn't like being told that that's what they had to do, or being told off for not doing it. So he decided that he was just getting maybe sullen acceptance, but as soon as he left, they would probably remove the hats. So he decided to try a different approach. Next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hard hat, he asked if the hats were uncomfortable or didn't fit properly. Then he reminded the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury, and suggested it should always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulation with no resentment or emotional upset.
Yeah.
So being told you have to wear a mask gets you back up. Being told you're helping out your community by wearing a mask has a far more softer.
Isn't it interesting that we're almost back to that now, with all this COVID sort of being given orders?
So there you go. There's how we're updating it for the modern situation.
Yeah.
So he talks about this sort of, that when people, and Russ Devan summed this up recently on a mastermind call, when you have a position, it means you automatically will have an opposition.
Yeah.
So, but if you can get people to look at something as if it was their idea, then they're going to buy into it, aren't they? They're going to get involved.
And also, even when you, it goes back to the, like, don't make assumptions, doesn't it, really?
That's right.
Don't make assumptions. So, because by pointing out, you know, that they're not like sort of powering, it's sort of like lording it over people, isn't it, really? I know better than you.
It is, it can be, yeah, it can be certainly be taken that way.
That never helps, really, does it?
No.
And the minute the person, we do this with children too, the minute the kid feels criticized, you know, like reports, for instance, like he can do well when he tries or when he listens, you know, and it's supposed to be, well, we know, you know, that's supposed to be a compliment, but in fact it's terrible criticism. No.
And this is a lot to do with what he covers in this part one of the book, with these first 3 chapters, is in it's all in how you approach people and how you being.
And then there's no the confidence and faith's gone. You know, they go down.
You can say the same thing, but say it 2 different ways. You can say it in such a way that leaves the person alienated,
empowered,
and you know, hating your guts and not wanting to comply with what you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
Or you can do it in such a way that you earn respect and that you leave them feeling good about it and as if it's their idea and that they're helping.
I was going to say giving them a choice. Yeah.
So he's a great admirer, as Napoleon Hill was a great admirer of Abe Lincoln. So there's quite a few references to Lincoln in here. He starts off by saying that Lincoln was a bit of a rascal in some ways. He would write letters of condemnation, criticize people. He was a practicing lawyer, and he would attack his opponents openly in letters published in newspapers. He did a thing where he wrote letters and poems ridiculing people, and then he dropped them on the country roads where they were sure to be found. So he was a bit of a bugger, really, in terms of criticizing people in his early days, until in 1842 he picked on the wrong person and wrote a letter, and this guy challenged Lincoln to a duel. Now that puts things in perspective in the in the era that it was written, doesn't it?
Well, I didn't even think they had rules in those. Oh, well, I suppose they did.
Lincoln was a smart boy, and he had long arms, so he chose his choice of weapons was a long sword, because he thought he'd have an advantage by having long arms. So they were supposed to fight to the death on a sandbar in the Mississippi River, and at the last minute their seconds interrupted and stopped the duel. So it says this was the most lurid personal incident in Lincoln's life, but it taught him an invaluable lesson in the art of dealing with people. Never again did he write an insulting letter. Never again did he ridicule anyone. From that time on, he almost never criticized anybody for anything.
It's amazing.
Fascinating, isn't it?
You know,
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, but it's so important.
So this was on the digital version last night that I was listening to on the audiobook in the car as well. But he tells this story, which I think is fascinating, worth repeating, is that at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, there came up, or just after the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederate army was on the retreat. Lee was running away, basically trying to get back to safer ground, and came up against the Potomac River, and the river had swollen and was impassable. So he was trapped, and this was a golden opportunity for the Unionists to attack and finish them off, and, you know, end the war, because the whole army was trapped with their backs to a river. So Lincoln ordered General Meade, who was in charge of the Union Army, to not call a council of war, which was the sort of done thing, but to immediately attack and finish off the enemy and thus end the war. He not only sent a direct order, didn't only just telegraph it, he sent a personal messenger to make sure that the general was aware, this is what I need you to do, this is the action to take, you need to finish this war off now. General Meade, though, did the opposite of what he was told to do. He called a council of war, which gave them time to for the river to subside, and whilst they were supposedly having these peace talks, the Confederate army was able to then get across the river and escape. Lincoln was furious because this would have ended the war at that point, and instead it was prolonged, and probably many more soldiers were going to die. So he wrote a furious letter to General Meade, as he probably had every right to do, because the general had deliberately disobeyed the instructions of the acting, I suppose he was acting president, was he at the time? He was certainly in charge. And it's quite for Lincoln, it's quite a damning letter, and it's listed here of what he actually said. The question then is, what do you suppose Meade did when he read the letter? Well, the answer is he didn't do anything. You know why? Because the letter was never sent. Lincoln wrote the letter to get all his disappointment out of himself, and then he obviously thought better of it, and he thought, what's this going to achieve if I attack my general and tell him he's an idiot and he's done the wrong thing and he's made a mistake, and what's that going to do for his confidence? What's it going to do for his ability to continue to lead the army? Is he going to learn anything from it? Or is he going to defend his actions? And here's a very interesting twist. He thought, what if I was General Meade? What would I have done in that situation? And he thought, well, it's easy for me as a politician sitting here in safety to write this letter saying you should do this, you should attack. He said, but he's the guy who's been listening to all the screams of battle and people injured and dying and blood everywhere and horrible things, horrible, cannonballs ripping people apart and all this sort of thing. Maybe if I was in that situation, I was him, I would have seen enough.
And look, I think during the war that there was just so much during all wars, there was so much cock up, and enormous sacrifice of lives because of the cock ups,
So it said here that Lincoln put the letter aside, for he had learned by bitter experience that sharp criticisms and rebukes almost invariably end in futility. He realized that he would not have achieved anything by attacking General Meade, and instead he wrote him a supportive letter advising him to keep on doing his best and that type of thing. And Roosevelt said that when he was president, and whenever he was confronted with a perplexing problem, he would lean back and look up at a large painting of Lincoln, which hung above his desk in the White House, and ask himself, what would Lincoln do if he were in my shoes? How would he solve this problem? So it was a great role model. He became a great role model for, well, all presidents ever since, pretty much. But for a lot of people, Lincoln is often quoted as being a man who had an ability to lead and inspire people, and he did it not through criticizing, not through exposing their weaknesses, but by building people up.
How can you ever inspire people by exposing their weaknesses?
Yeah. So the principle is reward good behavior rather than punishing for bad. I think perhaps some of our politicians and the instructions that they're issuing to the police in Australia today, for example, could be a little different. That the police have been quite heavy-handed in some instances.
Oh, I've heard about this in Australia. I know when I was over there, my friend, he said the cops in Aussie are just not good.
There's been some brutal enforcement of these lockdown rules and so on, where people are trying to have an innocent protest and they've been bashed by police and that kind of thing. And but you can also understand from the police's point of view, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So but nobody's perfect. So he also says, when dealing with people, let us remember we are not dealing with creatures of logic. We are dealing with creatures of emotion, creatures bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity.
It's a good line,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Ben Franklin.
And this is it, you just can't. Their beliefs are so embedded. They're almost impossible to change.
Yeah, I think
I don't know about that.
people can change, but it's
no, I'm not saying people can't change, but many won't, many can't.
Yes, many don't
are
want
not able to
they've
make
justified
that shift.
and rationalize their actions or their decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
So instead, if you use the Socratic method of teaching and you ask people questions and then you feed in new information, they may change their own mind and feel that they've done it rather than that you've prompted them to do it.
And that dates right back to Socrates, huh? And my brother and sister-in-law have just been away and they've done a whole weekend on Plato and Socrates, you know, the whole week studying it.
I'm a great admirer of Marcus Aurelius as well,
Oh yeah,
one of the Roman emperors, and you know, this stuff is timeless. It's not something new that's just been invented. This is how to get the best out of people in any situation. So I love these two quotes. There's Ben Franklin. The secret of his success: I will speak ill of no man, he said, and speak all the good I know of everybody. So what does it do when you're, you know, if you're gossiping or slagging somebody off that's not there? It's not really.
No, since you're taking the poison, that's it, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
That's the case with the police too, I think, when they get all brutal.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know who Carlyle was. I'll have to look that up. But he says a great man shows his greatness by the way he treats little men.
Yes.
I think that means, you know, in height. I mean, that means people who are not of great standing, like your average member of the public. You might be a bigwig, you might be famous, you might be rich, but it's how you treat the average guy in the street in a sort of common everyday situation is what really.
Did you have anything to do with Perth University or
no
University of South? What is it called? University of Western Australia. You know Tim Minchin?
Yes.
Because he gave the most amazing speech.
Oh yes.
About
the video of that.
Yeah, it was a TED talk actually in the end, I think, almost.
So here's a great quote as well that I think is very, very useful. He gives a little story about a father scolding his son and then realizing that he's judging the son as if you were an adult, but he's just a kid, you know. So you've got to make allowances for that. It's quite a moving story, but it's quite a long one, so I won't get into that now. But he says, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. Dr. Johnson, I think that's Dr. Samuel Johnson, isn't it? Said, God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man till the end of his days. So why should you and I? So there you go. That's chapter 1. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. I better move on a bit faster. That was the biggest chapter of the 3, though. The second one is the big secret of dealing with people. By making the other person want to do a thing or whatever it is. In other words, if you tell someone to do something and it's your idea and they might not necessarily agree with it, they're not going to buy into the concept as much as if they want to do it, that they feel like they're on board with the idea. They feel that they believe what you believe, or that they can understand the reasoning behind the instruction. And that was something I was taught in early days in management, is when you delegate something to a staff member, don't just tell them do this, tell them why you want them to do it and what that's going to achieve, and how ideally how they're going to benefit from it in some way if you can do, but to get people thinking the same way. And he lists some of the things that most people want, and he comes up with a list of 8. So 1 is health and the preservation of life. 2, food. 3, sleep. 4, money and the things money will buy. 5, life in the hereafter. 6, sexual gratification. 7, the well-being of our children. But number 8, a feeling of importance. No one wants to be belittled.
No.
And if you talk down to people, you make them feel less important, they're not going to be as on board with you. So the great leaders and inspirational figures throughout history have been people who have a capacity to uplift their followers or their employees or their armed forces or whoever it is that they are managing or leading. They make people feel important. I used to study the Napoleonic Wars a lot when I was younger, and I was fascinated by the whole history of Napoleon and how he would march up and down with his regiments, and he would give them inspiring pep talks, you know, before they were about to go into battle. But he would make those soldiers feel like they were all absolutely important in that whatever they were doing, their part in the battle was what was going to win the battle.
Wasn't he one of Napoleon Hill's round table?
Yeah, I think he might have been. It makes sense because there's a lot of the visionary side of things. We'll digress slightly there, but Napoleon, when he was about 10 years old, there's a picture of him in the playground. He was from Corsica, not from France, but he imagined himself at the age of 10. He imagined himself one day being Emperor of France. Yeah, which is extraordinary. It's like a New Zealander saying, "I'm going to be Emperor of Australia."
Well, we'll ignore that comment. that was one to poke a stick, wasn't it? Eh?
So the deepest, William James, who's a great author, said the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. So just as I appreciate you ladies being here and being involved in this and being part of this, it's important to appreciate the contribution that people are making and to acknowledge that, because it's what we all want, what we want. And the secret is to find out what do people want and then help them see how they can get it. Exactly. And again, he talks in terms of sales. You know, none of us want to be sold to, but we all want to buy things, but we want it to be our idea that we're buying it for the good reasons that the salesperson has given us.
Yeah.
So if we
it doesn't mean you want to be left to buy it on your own. You know, that second part of what you're saying. You want to feel like it's your decision to buy it, not like you've been coerced or railroaded into doing something. But not just that. You don't want to, just be sort of like, here's the stuff, buy what you want. You want to, you know, this is our premium product, and these are all the reasons that you're making a really good decision buying it. Yeah, for sure. So, this was an interesting twist, I thought. So that some people go insane so that they can feel more important in an imaginary world. Yeah. That they have actually been so put down or disaffected in normal life that they retreat into a different world mentally where they can be whoever they want to be.
That's the multiple personality things, and you know, all sorts.
Very interesting that. So
it's interesting with the narcissist, or they, you know, that what do they call it?
Sociopath.
Yeah, sociopath. What turns that? You wonder, don't you?
So there's a few stories like Napoleon Hill that he did the same thing as Napoleon Hill. He went out and interviewed a lot of the leaders of the day, and some of those names may not be so familiar, but some of them are, you know, have stood the test of time. They're still, people know who you're talking about. One was Andrew Carnegie, same surname. Andrew Carnegie, of course, was the great steel tycoon who
and they weren't related, were they?
No, I don't think so. But he gave the example of Andrew Carnegie. Why did Andrew Carnegie pay $1 million a year, or more than $3,000 a day, to Charles Schwab? You heard the name Charles Schwab? So he ran the industry for him. Why? Because Schwab was a genius? No. Because he knew more about manufacture of steel than other people? No. Because Charles Schwab said himself that he had many men working for him who knew more about manufacturing steel than he did. The reason he was paid this salary was because of his ability to deal with people. His ability to arouse enthusiasm among his people, which Schwab said was the greatest asset I possess. And the best way to develop that in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. There is nothing else that so kills the ambitions of a person as criticisms from superiors.
No.
I never criticize anyone. I believe in giving a person incentive to work. So I'm anxious to praise, but loath to find fault. If I like anything, I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise. That's another great quote. And Carnegie also wanted to praise his assistants even on his tombstone. He wrote an epitaph for himself which read, "Here lies one who knew how to get around him men who were cleverer than himself." Now let's put that in a modern context. Richard Branson says his goal is to be the dumbest man in the room. Surround himself with really smart people.
Yeah.
But in saying that, what does that do for the people that are in the room with him? Oh, I'm smarter than Richard Branson.
Yeah.
Or as smart.
Yeah.
You know, I'm liking it to the situation when I was at work, and you know, people were being it's really difficult. You know, I'm trying to say, well, what do you do with this situation? You know, people were being unprofessional, they were being bullying, they were doing sneaky things, and you know, within management, what do you do in that situation? You know, we were actually literally asked by the big boss to spy on one of our staff members, one of our colleagues.
Yeah, I'm sure when you look back through your work history, as I do, I'm sure we all do, and there are so many examples you can think of where people got it so wrong.
Yes, unbelievable.
But I have to say, we're all guilty of that at some point. We all.
Yeah, and I remember when I was doing my degree distance, there was a book I read, Leading from, it was called Leading from Underneath, you know, being a leader, which is exactly what you're talking about, really. Leading from below, you know, how to do it. I'd quite like to give the book again. I think it might have just been a paper, actually, but it was an education degree, and it was a really good article about how you can lead from below if you've got the skill to work with people.
And it is a skill, because in management, especially, if you can win the confidence of the people and get them thinking the same way and get them to believe in you as a leader, you're also treading that fine line a lot of the time between becoming a little bit too friendly and then maybe just treating you like one of the workers, and then possibly losing the respect as well. So you have to keep that balance of still being able to be the boss and be assertive when you need to be. I love the quote Roosevelt used to say, "Talk softly but carry a big stick." So it was, you got people to feel that they were involved in the decision making, that they were as important as you were in getting the job done. But then you also had to be able to step back at times and put on your boss's hat and go, hang on, do what I'm saying because I'm the boss now. And that's an interesting balancing act as a leader, to do that, to be able to be one of them, but also be the leader as well when you need to be.
Yes, yeah, it certainly can get tricky though, because there's insidious behavior too, that's you know, that you, or people saying and agreeing and then going off and doing something different. So.
Oh, and politics, of course, as well, and people's own agendas, and
yeah,
we could get into that, but let's just go back to, because we're running out of time. He also brought in a couple of things too dear to your hearts, I would imagine. One, the first was a study on runaway wives. What do you think was discovered to be the main reason that wives ran away? And this also applies to men, and bear in mind the time that this was written, it was a runaway
men
was a very unusual thing in those days. It was more likely that the wife would run away than the guy would run away, I suppose. I don't know.
Runaway husbands.
There were runaway husbands, of course, but it was that it was a lack of appreciation for what they did, for the contribution that they made, if they were being taken for granted and not appreciated, which very often was a matter of not telling people, not communicating that. You might have appreciated them, but if you never said that, they would never know, would they? Yeah, my wife just shouted that she appreciates me. I appreciate you too, Joe. And this is the one, as a teacher, we nourish the bodies of our children and friends and employees, but how seldom do we nourish their self-esteem? So we provide them with roast beef and potatoes to build energy, but we neglect to give them the kind words of appreciation that would sing in their memories for years, like the music of the morning stars. So that was something I took on board from reading another great book by Dennis Waitley, The Seeds of Greatness. And it was to, when I was with my first wife and still with my children, is that I would read them bedtime stories, and I would always tell them, as he recommended in the book, always tell your children that they're special and that they're important, and don't neglect to do that, because it's easy not to. Like Jim Rohn says, things that are easy to do are also easy not to do.
I don't think I ever had that done.
Well, how powerful.
I didn't even have a story read.
How powerful is it now? So you're a grandmother now, aren't you, Julie?
Yeah.
So you have that opportunity again to pass that on now, to tell your grandchildren that they're important and they're special. And he then talks about the subtle distinction between appreciation and flattery. So
yes,
one is sincere, the other is insincere. So if you can find something that's not just cheap praise, but find something to thank somebody for, an employee in a shop or somebody who's giving you service in some way, whether in an office, a shop, or a factory, or families or friends, never forget that all our associates are human beings that hunger for appreciation. It is the legal tender that all souls enjoy. And I love this. Try leaving a friendly trail of little sparks of gratitude on your daily trips. You'll be surprised how they will set small flames of friendship that will be rose beacons on your next visit. So hurting people not only does not change them, it was never called for. So criticizing people is futile. It hurts people, but uplifting them, finding that something that they did right. That was something I've always had as a management maxim, is catch people doing things right. You can. It's easy to find people doing things wrong, and that was a criticism of the retail industry.
I bet you've been a lovely boss.
Well, I'd like to think so. Certainly it is a matter of, like I said, doing your best, and I've obviously made mistakes at times and then gone back and reflected on that. I thought, oh, I didn't handle that very well. How could I have done that better? I think that's the key thing that Dale Carnegie is saying in this book, is we're all a work in progress. Keep going back and checking and reflecting on things and going, did I show that person appreciation? Was I criticizing them? Was I disrespectful? Did I choose the right words? Did I do it the right way? And this was this is something from Emerson, but my father used to say this as well. Every man I meet is my superior in some way, in that I learn of him. My father used to say, everyone has something to teach you. So, you know, give people the opportunities to do so. Don't just put people down. I love this quote, I shall pass this way. This is something that Dale Carnegie has on his mirror, or did have on his mirror when he was alive. I shall pass this way but once. Any good, therefore, that I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. And I've thought that sometimes, you know, I've come out of a shop or something and I thought, you know, I didn't really thank the person for the service properly, or I didn't.
Did you go back in?
yeah, if I can, I do. Sometimes I do. Sometimes if, you know, you've already like left the service station and driven off, and you think, oh, I was in a rush and I didn't really make eye contact with that person. And I think so. I always try to make eye contact with people, you know, engage in some sort of conversation, try to leave them uplifted in some way, or a little better than when you found them. So chapter 3, he who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. For he also read there she, because that, as I said, we look at the era that this was written. So what is he talking about?
Can you say that again?
He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. What he can do is to give people what they want, to be interested in what they want. It's so easy to talk about what we want.
True.
And he gives lots of examples of letters. Now today you would use emails as similar examples, but blog posts, communications of any form. Back then it was only letters, but now it would be emails as well. If you can arouse in the other person an eager want, he who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. This was Harry A. Overstreet in his illuminating book, Influencing Human Behavior. So this is Dale Carnegie quoting Harry Overstreet. I love this example. He gives us, again, goes back to Andrew Carnegie, the steel tycoon. He describes Andrew Carnegie, the poverty-stricken Scotch lad who started to work at 2 cents an hour and finally gave away $365 million. Started off in life earning 2 cents an hour, and by the end of his working life gave away $365 million. He said that he learned early in life that the only way to influence people is to talk in terms of what the other person wants.
That's really, really interesting, isn't it? And good, it's really worth hearing, because he came from a poor base. So he must have also treated people very well, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And that's everything that I've read about him says that. And you think, look, the thing these days is you can always find someone who's critical. I've read loads of books. Richard Branson's been one of my business heroes, you know, one of the people I've looked up to as a shining light in terms of how he's approached things and his attitude to people. But I've also read the antithesis of that. I've read a book by a guy called Tim Barrow who wrote, he obviously went and found every person that Branson had ever fired or had a disagreement with and got them to give their thoughts on him. And, you know, you could find anybody, you take any person and go and interview all the people they've had some kind of an argument or a conflict with, and you'll have a whole book full of, well, this person's a complete...
Of course, and it'll be the view of the person that was, you know, the view of the person that may well have done something wrong, but was a bit of a criminal and justified it anyway, you know?
Yes, right back to the beginning.
Yeah.
I love this quote, and I can't think whether, maybe you can find it for me. It was, I suspect it was Oscar Wilde, but it might not have been. And it was about the art of good communication, I think it was, is to tell, it might have even been Churchill, is to tell someone to go to hell, but have them look forward to the journey.
Without the...
Churchill did say a similar to that thing.
Being able to tell someone to go to hell, but do it in such a way that they look forward to the journey.
Okay.
So I had the unfortunate experience of having to let someone go this week. There's been working with me for 6 years. But you know, there's justifications for it. He was starting his own business in basically direct conflict with what I'm doing. So he was going to be leaving anyway. But I decided to bring it forward and make it my decision rather than his decision when he would leave me. And I wasn't happy about having to do it, but I felt it was the right thing to do. But the way I approached it, the letter that I wrote, and also the conversation that I sat down and had with him, explaining my thinking, my reasoning, and how I was presenting it to him, that it was basically his idea anyway, because he'd already decided to start his own thing, and how I could best support him in doing that, and the, you know, the way we were going to handle his departure and so on. And at the end of it all, he turned around and thanked me for being a great boss, and had no hard feelings whatsoever, and was, you know, it was a very amicable parting. And I thought about that, and I thought that's not the first time that that's happened. I've had other people that I've had to fire for one reason or another, that have still been friends and have still come back to me and said, you were absolutely right, and the way you handled it was really right. So,
well, that's lovely, Tony, isn't it? That's really nice feedback.
Yeah, it is. It's a great thing to have, because it means, as I said, I feel like I have onboarded a lot of these principles from reading this book many times over, and that if you can get somebody to see, it's almost like they would fall on their own sword if they needed to, because they would realize that what they've done is not the right thing, or that, you know, they've broken a company policy or something. I can think of a few examples throughout my history of hiring and firing people, where I've had people leave but left on really good terms, and understood completely why the decision was the right thing to do, and in such a way that they didn't feel humiliated or let down or mistreated, that they felt like they'd been treated fairly.
Because at the end of the day, they've done what they've done anyway, haven't they? Which could be hurtful to you or against, you know, the not kind of kosher, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so you've got a choice whether to leave them, you know, feeling okay about it, or I mean, is that the case, do you think?
Yeah, I think understanding that they've crossed a line, and that therefore that's the only course of action that's left.
Yeah, and I think that's important to point that out in a way that is not disempowering, isn't it? And that's tricky, isn't it? It's a bit tricky.
It is, but if you can do it in such a way that you can at the same time, and I say this, you've got to be careful how you do this, but genuinely finding things to praise them for as well. So that they leave with respect, that they leave feeling that, okay, this thing or this combination of things that they've done has meant that they're not the right match for that position, but that's not devaluing them as a human being, that they've got other.
No, and also if he's going off in competition, the last thing you want him to be is cutthroat, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the conclusion here is another great quote is, tomorrow you may want to persuade somebody to do something. Before you speak, pause and ask yourself, how can I make this person want to do it?
In a way, it's quite manipulating.
Well, he addresses that, and that's a very good point there, Julie, that you've made. Just got to find the quote. Bear with me a second. It's not manipulating if, well, so I'll find the exact quote I'm looking for in a second, but Henry Ford said the best bit of human relationships lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. And he gives a whole series of letters that he shows how they could have been rewritten.
Okay.
Just trying to find it. Oh, here we go. Looking at the other person's point of view and arousing in him an eager want for something is not to be construed as manipulating that person so that he will do something that is only for your benefit and his detriment. Each party should gain from the negotiation. Key thing, win-win. Always look for win-win outcomes.
Yeah.
So that goes back to Think and Grow Rich, doesn't it? Everyone with an impression of increase.
Yes. So if you can think before you speak, how can I make this into a win-win situation? How can I make the other person see that they are gaining out of this as well? That obviously I'm gaining, but I'm not manipulating them so that I win and they lose, because that's not going to work. That's when it is manipulation. If you both win out of it and you find a way of presenting it, you're both winning out of it, then you both part feeling like you've had a win, feeling like you're valued, like you're important still. Your self-respect is intact. You haven't been attacked. You haven't been unfairly criticized. And so if you can get a staff member, if you have to fire somebody, if you can get them to see that they've really left you with no choice because of their actions, but that doesn't mean you don't value them as a person still. It's like with children, you're not criticizing the child, you're criticizing the behavior of the child. It's the same with employees, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Hey, I've got to go back to work.
Yep,
so
it's that time. That was
the
third principle. The third principle of that chapter was arousing the other person an eager want. So you've covered the whole of part one. Fundamental.
Arouse a want in the other person. Yeah.
I'm going to go.
Okay. Bye-bye, darling.